Friends, with the words of Romans lifted before our ears, let love be genuine, hate what is evil, and hold fast to what is good. I just invite you into a word of prayer with me now. Holy and loving God, take our minds and think with them, take our lips and speak with them, take our hands and work with them, and take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you and all of creation. Amen. We are in a drought here in Massachusetts. Liz knows that. Stewarding our public gardens, it's a challenge. We need some more water. And right now, one of the hardest things for many of us is you can't have campfires. You can't have little fire pits outside. Last night, our presbytery gathered with our youth in our GLOW movement, and they couldn't have a campfire. They had to move inside the Burlington Church building to have a semi-campfire indoors because of the fear of wildfire spreading. One of my favorite memories from running a camp up in New Hampshire for many years was singing outside around a campfire, "Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary." This praise song from the 1980s has caught fire, not just in the Christian tradition, but in the Jewish tradition and perhaps others. This past week, when I was invited to gather with GBIO clergy 2 days after the election, there, lifted by one of our beloved rabbis, was, "Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary," in English and in Hebrew. I was very deeply moved by that. Prepare me, my heart, to be pure and holy for you, O God. Make me ready for your presence so I can love others. So I feel like we should be invited to a campfire right now. I feel like that seems appropriate. I think s'mores should be brought here to church right now. Let go of your bulletins and find a marshmallow and maybe some dark chocolate, not just the Hershey's type, some graham crackers. We need a good story. I want to gather us around a campfire and not spread wildfire, but grab and spread some good news, hopefully around this campfire. So today, I would like us to lean into a great story in our scriptures given to us from our Jewish friends and siblings. The story, wait, before I tell you, trivia, what 2 books in our scriptures are named for women? Esther and Ruth. Y'all are good. Esther and Ruth. Okay, so this is one of those. It is a full book in the Bible. It comes after Ezra and Nehemiah in our tradition, right before Job and then Psalms. So if you have your Bible, you can flip open to the middle of the Bible and flip back a little bit, and you'll find Esther. It's about 12 chapters. There's some canonical, deuterocanonical versions of it that add some chapters, but what we know of is this story. Today we heard 1 chapter from that. I would love for us to lean in to this story today. I think there may be some granting of wisdom, granting of courage for us from this story. So once upon a time, there was a king. Right off the bat, I want to apologize for that word king, maybe a little triggering for us as we begin today with thinking about absolute control and consolidated power and sovereignty over others. But listen, stay with me here. Once upon a time, there was a king. The king's name was Ahasuerus, a very challenging name for me to say, so from here on out, we're going to call him the king. This king ruled the first Persian Empire around 500 BCE, which consisted of some 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, most likely Xerxes I, the Great. This was following the Jewish exile in Babylon. And one day, this king decides, you know what? I am rich, and I want other people to know that. So as a king, what you do when that is the case, you throw a party. And there was kind of 180 days lead up to this party, and then there was a 7-day focus, a huge party for 7 days, because he wanted people to know how rich he was. So it was lavish, it was full of food and wine, and it says in the text that there were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones, and drinks were served in golden goblets. Drinking was by the flagons without restraint. This was a serious rager. So on the 7th day of this party, the king decides to summon his wife, Vashti the queen, to show her off as one of his many riches. Pause right there and see the patriarchal misogyny meter flipping into the red. deeply unsettling, and it gets worse. The king summons Vashti and says, "Queen, come, wear your crown and come show your beauty off to my guests." And some biblical scholars interpret this to mean literally, Vashti, come wearing only your crown. Before you walk away and stop listening to this story, to chalk it up as one more biblical example that sanctions men telling women what they can do with their bodies, check this out, what happens next. Vashti, does she say yes to the king who might kill her if she says no? No, she says, "No way, I am not coming." She obeys with disobedience to him and his objectification. I think there's a powerful no in our scriptures. So the king, in his cowardice, in my opinion, gets very angry. And instead of going to confront her, he goes and gathers his men, his counselors, and says, "What am I to do? My wife has said no to me." His advisors blow off his own marital concern and says, "King, we have no comfort for you because there is something far more dire at stake here. Not only has your wife done something wrong to you, but she's done something wrong to all men everywhere. For what in the world will happen if women hear this and begin to do whatever they want opposed to what their husbands want? Chaos, calamity." So, the king is very frightened and listens to the counsel of these also offended and scared men. And they say to the king, it's time to take to royal social media. It's time to put out a decree to all the 127 royal provinces to spread the vile misinformation that every man should be master of the house. And I have to say to you all now, pausing, that message is still alive and well in our world and lifted through Christian tradition again and again. I would call it a deep heresy, but this is one of its origin stories. And so as a result of this decree, Vashti is relieved from her duties from the palace. She is not killed, she is let go, and I would say she is liberated, but this is one interpretation. And so the king says, well, I need to find another wife, and so he summons all his counselors to go out to the whole kingdom and find suitable potential wives. And this is where we first meet Esther. She is brought to the palace as people noticed how beautiful she was. She is an orphan Jew who is being raised by her uncle Mordecai. The court officials put her through a beautification cosmetic treatment that lasts not a day or a week, it lasts an entire year. I have no idea what's going on here. Is a biblical justification for spa day. I'm not sure what's happening. It seems like there's probably some other stuff going on here, but myrrh and perfumes. And finally, after this treatment, Esther is brought before the king, who is super wowed by her beauty, and so he names her as his queen. However, she does not bring her full self to the throne, right? She retains inside her Jewish identity as guided by her uncle, lest some danger befall her. So in order to keep an eye on Esther, Mordecai frequently hangs out by the outside palace gates, and one day he overhears some people talking about wanting to assassinate this king. And Mordecai then runs to the court officials, tells them, they end up saving the king's life, and Mordecai is lifted up and honored in this way. And people have good vibes for him and all over the kingdom, except for one person, another character named Haman. Haman was a very powerful, close advisor to the king, and he was not excited when other people, other men especially, got attention. So he was not very happy about Mordecai. And Haman was a very arrogant, self-focused person and had this strange fascination with other people bowing down to him. And so when he walked outside and saw Mordecai at the gate, Mordecai did not bow down to him. He only would bow to Yahweh, his God. And he did not. He refrained. So this really enraged Haman. And instead of striking Mordecai down, he thought something more nefarious, more narcissistic, more violent. And as is often the case with similar people who are self-absorbed and narcissistic, especially men, in cowardice, he retaliates. This retaliation was to come up with an entire plan to eliminate all the Jews in Persia at the time, to deny, deport, destroy all women, children, young, old, all men, everyone, all genders in his kingdom. To do this of the Jewish faith. To do this, he began spewing misinformation and lies once again through the social medias of the time, and said to the king, you need to, he said to the people that there are people in your kingdom who do not keep the king's laws and should no longer be tolerated. Haman sent a royal decree by horse and rider throughout and said that there are enemies from within, and they need to be utterly destroyed. They are no longer true Americans. They are no longer true people in the kingdom. They need to be routed out. And this message to all the cities was that on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, at an appointed time, all people were to rise up and strike down all the Jews, to plunder then their goods. For what began as pure revenge from a perceived public insult of Haman quickly morphed into a wild scheme to gather wealth that could then be brought back into the royal coffers. We can think 1921 Tulsa's Black Wall Street race massacre, and many other sad examples in today's world. So Haman's misinformation campaign came with lies and vitriol and worked really well. People started to prepare for this great day of evil, seemingly without questioning what was afoot. And so the story gets to the part in chapter 4 that we just heard Liz read so well. Mordecai hears about this coming great day of evil, and he becomes deeply distressed. With sackcloth and ashes, he descended into public mourning right in front of the palace gate. And he sends words to Esther. She must do something to help. She must go and speak to the king and put a stop to this coming pogrom. Now, there are 3 reasons why Esther pushes back a little and says, I do not think this is a good idea. The first being, as earlier described, 500 BCE Persia was not a very woman-centered societal setting. In fact, the only time a woman would be able to see or speak to the king is if they were summoned, including the queen. Going unsummoned had serious consequences. One could be killed. 2, Esther thought that criticizing the king's closest advisor and friend might not be the wisest move. It might also backfire. And 3, maybe most importantly, the reason she held back is that by speaking up, she would have had to expose herself as a Jew, something that could have also dire consequences. She had been living safely and had attained a position of power, and so coming out could be very dangerous. And this is where we get to that famous line that probably many of us know and are familiar with in the book of Esther, where Mordecai responds to Esther saying, "Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Now, this powerful prophetic line convicts Esther, and she immediately summons her entourage to fast and pray with her for 3 days and with Mordecai. And then, seemingly emboldened with those prayers and that fasting, she does not immediately run to the king and plead dramatically that there is a destructive plot against her people. No, she very much plays it cool, and she approaches the king and says, "King, hey, any chance you'd be willing to come to my palace tomorrow for a meal? I'm here to cook for you," which is a good strategy probably for anyone you disagree with, to prepare some food, a biblical rationale perhaps for vegan potlucks at this church as we think about how to move forward. The night before the king went over for this meal, he agreed. He did not strike Esther down, thanks be to God. He said, "Yes, I am hungry, I will come." But the night before, the king got hit with insomnia. We've all been there, and even royalty gets hit with insomnia. And so he does something that probably many of us would not. He does not open up his iPad or a book. He summons his lackeys to come to him to read the court records to him. So this would be like us calling up Trudy Veldman and saying, "Trudy, at 3 a.m, could you come over and read the council minutes for me? I can't fall asleep." He summons these folks to read, and when they read it, they come to the part where Mordecai had saved the king from assassination. And so he said, "Wait a sec, that was a great thing. I like this guy. Did we honor him yet?" And people said no. So then he summons Haman, and he says, "Haman, what should we do to someone who honors me?" And Haman, of course, only thinking about himself, says, "Well, king, I got a list for you. You should get him some new clothes. You should get him a new ride, a new horse. You should put a parade together for him." And the king says, "Perfect. Haman, can you go ahead and do all that for Mordecai?" And Haman is beside himself. He follows the king's command lest he get killed, and is humbled and humiliated. And after doing all that for Mordecai, runs home, yells at his wife, and immediately goes into his backyard and builds a gallows to hang Mordecai the next day on. So the next day, Haman and the king come over to that banquet with Esther, and after much good wine and food, just at the right time, Esther summons that wisdom and courage, and she speaks directly to the king. King, I am troubled, and so should you be, for you are about to lose a huge amount of faithful and loyal subjects, and I am one of them. These are my people. And the king immediately is shocked and angry and says to his beautiful queen, as he often refers to her, Esther, what is going on? Who has summoned this? And she points to Haman. The king, in his rage, with irony filled in this great story, orders Haman to then be hung on the very gallows that he had made for Mordecai. The king then goes to social media and sends a decree saying, ignore the false misinformation and lies that you have heard from Haman. Instead, let us celebrate the Jews who are an essential part of our community. Now, there are a few troubling verses at the end of this book that contain some references to Jews going out with senseless violence to kill those who were planning to do them harm. Some scholars are a little unclear the origins of those. But the point here, the main point in this ending of a story, is a word of deliverance. Good triumphs over evil someday. And Mordecai drinks a lot and dances around a lot at the end, and there is a connection, and forgive me, Rabbi Michael, you know this far better, there is a connection, a direct one here to the Jewish festival that is still celebrated, Purim, where the Talmud commands that observants drink and dance around and celebrate and remember someone standing up to violence and an eradication of God's people. I really like this story of Esther. And while there are some troubling aspects, misogyny, violence, and vengeance, I am very glad it is part of our sacred canon. Another trivia point to make about this book is that, like one other book in our scriptures, it does not mention God at all. Some, just like the Song of Songs, these two books don't mention God, and yet there is a filled implication of living into God's ways in these texts. But it also calls us to think, where is God in the midst of these things? Where do we find courage? And lest we say too much to ruin a good story, I want to remind ourselves that this story speaks some wisdom and courage to us following the unsettled nature of our week. Now, I in no way presume to think how you voted, who you voted for, whether you voted or not. There's no question, though, in our country there is pain, there is division, and there is hurt, there is exhaustion. So I want us to imagine ourselves in this story. Perhaps today you find yourself with Mordecai outside the gates, stunned and sickened, covered in sackcloth and ashes. The weight is too much, the exhaustion too much, the fear too much. So hear this today if you are. That is okay. There's a place for you in the holy story. Sit with Mordecai, lament, cry out, reach out, find others who are also in pain outside the gate. There is a place for you. Perhaps you might find yourself with the up to chapter 4 Esther, locked in a closet of silence, fearful of letting your true self be known or seen because the stakes seem too high. If so, hear this. That too is okay. You are a part of this sacred story. Join Esther there. Keep a silent vigil. I know a specific friend in Florida who had voted a certain way, and most of her friends voted a very different way. And when she shared how she voted this week with some of her dear friends, she was yelled at. She was scared by this. So she is now trying to find a peace in that place of silence. That holy silence, that safety-keeping silence. There is a place for that. There is a time for that. Now, there is a sacred time also to find yourself moving toward speech. So perhaps you're drawn more to the side of Mordecai that holds nothing back, pleads with those in power to act. Act now. If so, hear this too. It is okay. There's a place for you. And maybe you find yourself also with Queen Vashti, who finds her power and her liberation in that strong word no to empire's demeaning demands. It is okay too. You have a holy place in this story. Finally, I wonder, you might find yourself asking the question, what would it be like, what would it feel like to join Esther in a true coming out into the full, true self, speaking truth to power. It may not be yet, it may feel too soon for you, but that image of empowering and imagining, speaking fully into your fully self, from your fullest self to a place for justice might be an intriguing place to think. So a word that if you are one of our beloved LGBTQ people, if you are one of our beloved Black, brown, indigenous people, if you happen to be born in another country, if you are disabled, if you are experiencing any form of societal marginalization or judgment in the midst of this country, however you voted, hear this. This story reminds you there is power in you. You are made in the very image of God, and Esther's affirmation that you have been made for such a time as this may very much just be the Spirit's whispering into your ear that you have a sacred role in this story, and God is not yet done with you yet. There is Spirit-infused power with people standing proudly into their truth selves, and it is our job, just like Mordecai, to help others find those safe places to come into the light. For in order to face the king, Esther finds deep wells of unknown courage from her prayers, her fasting, her relationship with Mordecai, someone who believed in her. So we should note those ingredients. For such a time as this, as a divine refrain, gives us people and spiritual practices to hear that and know when it is time and when we are called to speak and when we are called to be silent. So right now, I ask that us not to move fast from any part of this story, from one part to another. Land where you do land. Understand, as our sacred reckonings process teaches us, that we are called to move at the speed of trust. Trust in relationships, trust in community, trust in the linkages between Mordecai and Esther that are an essential part of the bending work toward liberation. All of this, church, takes time. All of it is challenging, and yet the braiding of relationships, one after another, becomes stronger and stronger, even when they are tested and tried. So I want to leave us with one of my favorite images of Jesus when he is faced with the powers of misogyny and hatred served up by religious leaders who come to him after setting up a woman and claiming that she is an adulterer. They throw this woman before Jesus. And what is the first thing he does? He does not strike back. He does not speak up. He remains silent. But he takes his fingers and places them into the earth. And he doodles in the sand. He doodles in the dirt. He switches the focus of violence to wonder. One of my activist friends this week lifted up the words of Brian McLaren, who had been lifting up the words of Valerie Kaur, who had been lifting up the words of Dr. Martin Luther King from 1956 in his great speech. A time such as this, the birth of a new age. All of those have repeated the refrains from time and time again, that when something is trying to be born, something also dies. There is labor before the birth, there is a pushing, and there is a liberation. And in this, my friend lifted that when she was pregnant, she felt a deep desire to go outside and just put her hands in the dirt. And it really grounded her quite literally. And the next day, she gave birth. And she really found that the earth had something to teach her about the ways of moving forward and bringing new life. So friends, I would invite us into that spiritual practice that Jesus teaches us. We don't have to know the answers. We don't have to have all the words. We may remain silent for a time, for a lifetime, or for a short time. We may know when to act or when not to act. But remember our traditions, remember the earth. And I am so grateful for this next hymn, which was also sung by someone named Martin Luther, not the king, but the reformer. And he spoke about this reality, that there is a mighty fortress named our God, a bulwark never failing, our present help amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe does seek to work us woe with craft and power great, and armed with cruel hate on earth without an equal. And though this world, with devils filled, should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed the truth to triumph through us. The powers of evil grim, we tremble not for them. Their rage we can endure, for lo, their doom is sure. One little word shall fell them. That word beyond all earthly powers forever is abiding. The Spirit and the gifts are ours, for Christ is with us siding. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth shall triumph still. God's reign endures forever. So friends, let us be brave Esthers, let's be Mordecais to each other, and let us say to ourselves and one another, you were made for this. You have dignity, you are loved. God is present with all. Amen. I invite us to sing as is printed, your hymnal lists, your bulletin lists, the hymn number,